All right. Classification. Ursus Arctus Horribilis, you get down here this instant. Uh-oh, when my mom calls me by my full Latin species name, I'm in big trouble, says the little bear. So at this point in class, we would do a card sort. I would present you with cards that have different pictures of different species on them. And you would sort them, well, pictures of different organisms, I guess, and you would sort them into species. And then we would have a discussion about how similar enough, like what is similar enough? How similar do things have to look in order for them to be considered the same species? These are just some examples of what you would see. All of these are the same species of bean. They are look different because they are subspecies. Then we have the white-tailed deer. We have the male, the baby, and the female, and they all look different. Elk, again, we have a baby and a male. Black bear, polar bear, and Panamanian golden frog. We have the juvenile form here and we have the adult form. So if you had never seen these animals before and you were to see this and you saw this, you would think that they were different organisms. We also have this spotted frog here. Maybe you would think that this frog is the adult life form of this because I'm going to have to say this looks a lot more like that than it does like that. And then here we have a mutant. Four-leaf clover is a mutant. So if you had never seen clover before, how would you know that this and this and this are all the same species? Here's what we're going to talk about today. Mostly taxonomy. Taxonomy is the study of naming and describing organisms, and it has to do with biodiversity. Biodiversity is the term used to describe the wide variety or diversity of organisms in the world. And we have here this picture of, oh, did I go too fast? Probably I went too fast. I tend to do that. We have this picture here of all the major branches of living organisms. Only a fraction of living organisms are actually listed here. Scientists estimate there's almost 1 trillion species, and most of them have not been discovered yet. Anyway, taxonomy is the science of describing, naming, and classifying organisms. There's two definitions of species. The first one is the morphological definition. If two organisms appear similar enough, they belong to the same species. And this is the definition that you would have been working on during the card sort. Some advantages are we can use this with things that we can only observe, such as fossils of extinct species. If you see two fossils, the only thing you can do is look at them. You can't watch how they interact or how they behave or how they mate or anything. But it doesn't work if maybe the organism you discover is a mutant and it looks different than the rest of its species, even though it is the same species. Or the juvenile stage of a species might look different from the adult stage of the same species. And then also, what does similar enough mean? What qualifies that? So these problems are solved with a biological definition of species, which says that a species is a group of organisms that can do three things. They can breed with each other to produce fertile, viable offspring. Fertile offspring means offspring that can reproduce, and viable offspring means offspring that lives to maturity. This is really great because it will give us an answer to those questions. If you find something that's a mutation or that has a mutation that is a mutant, is it the same species as something else? And if you mate them and they're able to produce viable fertile offspring, then yes, they are the same species. Also, this is good for organisms with different developmental stages, but we cannot use it for fossils or extinct species or asexually reproducing species. That would be species that reproduce on their own without having sex. So let's do an example. Here on the left, we have a horse. Where's my pointer? There we go. And on the right, we have a donkey. And the question is, are the horse and the donkey the same species? Well, they can interbreed. They can make a mule, so they can interbreed and they can produce viable offspring. The mule can live to adulthood, but the mule itself cannot reproduce. So we know that the horse and the donkey are not the same species because their offspring is not fertile. There's an estimated 5.3 million to 1 trillion species worldwide, and many of them are inaccessible. Scientists estimate this based on patterns in biodiversity and habitats. For example, we know that biodiversity is much greater in areas that are really warm and have a lot of rainfall. So those environments are going to be able to support a much larger variety of species than areas that are cold and very dry. Phylogenetics is the study of evolutionary relationships and ancestry among groups of organisms. The evolutionary history of a particular species is called the phylogeny of that species. There are some characteristics we use to classify organisms. First, we compare proteins and DNA RNA sequences. This provides the most precise information for relationships between organisms. Let's take a look at this picture here. It represents the hemoglobin beta chain. Hemoglobin is the protein in red blood cells that carries oxygen. So it's pretty important to life, and a lot of different living organisms have it. And we can compare the protein of the hemoglobin beta chain in humans, rhesus monkey, dog, bird, and fish and see how similar they are. So in humans, it has 146 amino acids in the protein. The rhesus monkey, 138 of those are identical. Hey, Smith, be good. Sorry, cats. Um, where were we? Nope, 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 nope. Well, we were talking about the DNA. Yes, the proteins. Okay. So rhesus monkey, 138 of those amino acids are identical to the human. And there are 8 different amino acids. And then we go down to the dog and we see that there's 114 amino acids that are identical to the human. And there are 32 differences, and so on and so forth until we get to the fish. And if you had never seen these organisms before in your life, you would be able to tell just from this data that this organism and this organism are pretty closely related, whereas this organism and this organism are not very closely related. And indeed, humans and rhesus monkeys are pretty closely related, but humans and fish are not so closely related. We also use comparative embryology, which means comparing how embryos develop. If you had never seen a human, rabbit, chick, tortoise, salamander, or fish, you could still look at the way their embryos develop and tell who is more closely related to whom. So let's take a look at the fish and the salamander. Here we have the earliest stage of embryonic development, and then we progress to a middle stage and a later stage. The fish and the salamander are pretty close. Whereas the human and the fish are not close at all. They look similar in the very first stage, but after that, that's where the similarity ends, man. Um, a human and a rabbit, however, those look pretty similar at most of their stages. We also use homologous structures, which are physical similarities of living species. Here are 4 forearms. We have a human, a cat, a whale, and a bat. The brown is the phalanges. That's your fingers. And notice that in the human and the cat, the phalanges are relatively short and they're compact. They're close together. Whereas in the whale and the bat, they get much longer and they start to spread out a little bit. So we can tell that the human and the cat are more closely related than the human and the whale or the human and the bat. And how do we draw these? How do we draw these relationships? Well, we use phylogenetic trees to display them, much like a family tree. The points where the lines intersect represent common ancestors. Let's do an example. This is an accurate depiction of your family, but it is not a family tree. Your great-grandfather gave birth to your grandfather, who gave birth to your father, who gave birth to you. That's accurate, but it's incomplete. This is your family tree. We're starting at the bottom, as with any tree, with the oldest part. And then as we progress upward and to the right, we get closer and closer to the present until in the top right corner we have the most present, most current, most recent. There we go. We have the most recent organism. Remember I said wherever the lines intersect, we've got little circles here, represent the common ancestors. So the first ancestors are the great-grandparents. The great-grandparents gave birth to the second cousins and the grandparents. The grandparents gave birth to the cousins and the parents. The parents gave birth to the siblings and they gave birth to you. Similarly, this is not evolution. Fish do not become salamanders, which do not become, I will call them back, which do not become cats, which does not become you. This is more like it. Here we've got a more complex, more complete picture. This is obviously still very simplified, but it's better. So here we've got the common ancestor of all vertebrates. Some of the offspring of those became fishes, and some of those offspring got 4 legs. This is the common ancestor of 4-legged vertebrates. Some of those offspring became amphibians, and some of those offspring became mammals. This is the common ancestor of mammals, who are 4-legged vertebrates. We got whatever this is, cat maybe, rat, I don't know, and human. Here's a critical thinking question. This is multiple choice. Based on the cladogram below, which statement must be true? A little critical thinking. We're going to be waiting for 7 answers. Interesting. Okay, 13% say A, 25% say B, 50% say C, and 13% say D. Let's take a look at these answers. A, species 1 and 2 cannot have traits in common with species 3 and 4. Well, we know that's not true because species 1, 2, 3, and 4 all share one common ancestor, so they must have some things in common. 2, species 3 and 4 are found in different ecosystems than species 1 and 2. That is not true because a cladogram, a phylogenetic tree, does not say anything about the ecosystems or the habitats in which an organism lives, only evolutionary relationships. C, species 3 is more genetically similar to species 4 than to the other species. This is correct. You can see that species 3 and 4 are closest together on the tree. D, species 1 has a less direct relationship to the common ancestor than the other species. This is incorrect. If we take a look, species 1 has one node. Remember, a node represents a common ancestor. One node between itself and the ultimate common ancestor. Species 2 is separated from the ultimate common ancestor by 1, 2 nodes. Species 3 and 4 are separated by 1, 2, 3 nodes. So in fact, species 1 has the most direct relationship to the common ancestor. And species 3 and 4 have the least direct relationship. These are some ways that the phylogenetic trees can be drawn. I just wanted to give you an idea of the diversity. At this point in class, we would draw this picture, but you don't need to know it to have or for the exam, so I'm not going to make you draw it. I'm just going to explain to you. Back here, down here, as with on the bottom of every tree, the oldest part is the trunk. We have the common ancestor, and then that common ancestor gave rise to 2 groups. One group became the cyanobacteria, the bacteria, and one group became what we call archaea. Both of those are prokaryotes. Remember, prokaryotes are cells that do not have a nucleus or membrane-bound organelles. And then what evolved from the archaea? Well, the eukarya did, the eukaryotes. Remember, these are cells that have a nucleus and membrane-bound organelles, so they are more advanced. 8 major taxonomic categories. This hierarchy ranges from most general to most specific. We have domain, kingdom, phylum, class, order, family, genus, species. You can remember this a couple of ways. You're going to need to know these in order. You could say, Dear King Philip came over for good sandwiches, or, my personal favorite, dumb kids playing catch on freeways get squashed. I would have you do this critical thinking workout, brain workout, I guess, handout, but we're not going to do that because we're not in the classroom. So let's just go through an example. Grizzly bear. We're going to start with the domain. Domain eukarya. Everything in domain eukarya is a eukaryote. It is made of cells with a nucleus and membrane-bound organelles. And a grizzly bear falls into that category. So does insect, fish, snake, bird, pig, dog, panda, black bear, and, well, grizzly bear. So our domain is eukarya. Kingdom is Animalia. That's all the animals. All of these things are in kingdom Animalia. Then we're going to get a little more specific. The phylum is Chordata, only things with spinal cords. So we've lost the insect. The insect is in a different phylum. Now class. Class is Mammalia. This is mammals. We've lost the fish, snake, and bird. Those are in different classes. Order, Carnivora. These are carnivores. We've got the dog, the panda, the black bear, and the grizzly bear. Family, Ursidae. Oh, we've lost the dog. Panda, black bear, and grizzly bear only. Genus is Ursus, and that's the black bear and the grizzly bear, and species is Horribilis, which is the grizzly bear. So if we are referring to the grizzly bear, we will use its genus name and its species name. We will say it is Ursus horribilis. This is another critical thinking question. Go ahead and try it out. Keep in mind that let me pointer options. There we go, pen. Keep in mind that they're not going to show you the domain here. We're only showing the kingdom, phylum, class, order. Sorry, I'm trying to do this with my mouse. Family, genus, species. And I'm going to wait for 7 answers. Okay, 63% got the correct answer, which is D. Oh, 67%. Kingdom, phylum, class. Let's take a look at this. Here's the kingdom level. Human is kingdom Animalia, and so is the armadillo. So they have kingdom in common. Phylum, Chordata and Chordata. They have phylum in common. Class, Mammalia and Mammalia. They have class in common. Order, Primata and Cingulata. Okay, they're different orders, so that's where they start to diverge, which means they have the same kingdom, phylum, and class, which makes the answer the letter D. So we have to have a uniform standard way of naming organisms so that when a scientist who speaks English is communicating with a scientist who speaks Russian, for example, they know that they're talking about the same organism. And we use the language of Latin because Latin is a dead language. Nobody speaks it conversationally anymore. If you think about English, which is a living language, people speak it conversationally. The language mutates, it changes over time. The word gay, for example, now means something very different than it did in 1950. And we have new words coming up all the time. I heard that the word yeet was added to the dictionary. I don't know if that's true, but it will be at some point if it's not already, because it is a word now. It's a series of air vibrations that represents an idea, which is what a word is. And Latin is great because none of that happens in Latin. Imagine if somebody discovered a starfish, years ago and named it, oh, I don't know, I don't know what the starfish Latin name is, but something in Latin, and then people continue to speak Latin and the names of those words changed, then somebody would have to make up a new name for that starfish. That would be no good. This system is called binomial nomenclature. Bi meaning two, nomial meaning name. So 2 names. The 2-part name is the genus and species. The species is also called the specific epithet. So for example, Homo sapiens. Homo is the genus and sapiens is the species. The genus always comes before the species. It's always written in italics. The genus is always capitalized, just like you would capitalize the first letter of a sentence. And if you handwrite it, you have to underline it. Canis familiaris. The genus is Canis, capitalized. The specific epithet or species is familiaris. That's the domesticated dog. Here's a table for you to fill in while you are studying. We're going to go through the domains and kingdoms and just some characteristics of each. So this is starting our next section of the lecture. Describe the domains and kingdoms. The domain is the most general or most inclusive level of organization. There are only 3 domains: bacteria, archaea, and eukarya. Domain bacteria, all the members are prokaryotic and they are all unicellular. There's many kingdoms, but you only need to know one, which is kingdom Eubacteria. Bacteria are extremely important to society and agriculture especially. They are the only organism that can take nitrogen atoms from an atmospheric form and fix them in a solid form so that plants can use them. They are needed for decomposing waste. We use them in cheese and yogurt and bread. Domain archaea, all the members are prokaryotic and unicellular. There's many kingdoms, but you only need to know about the kingdom Archaebacteria. These are the oldest of all organisms in terms of evolution, and scientists believe this because they can survive in very extreme environments. Very salty, very acidic, very sulfuric, very hot, very cold. And early Earth was a very hostile environment. It was really hot. There was a lot of volcanic activity, very sulfuric atmosphere filled with different chemicals. So Archaea probably would have been able to survive in that kind of atmosphere. And we will talk more about that when we get to chapter 10. I'm going to play this for you. It's only about 2 minutes long, and it's some kid's school project that I stumbled across. And it is fucking hilarious.
In the beginning of time, billions and billions of years ago, a cell was born. He was a unicellular prokaryotic bacteria with a name only he could possess. Archaebacteria. The Archaebacteria lived in the most extreme environments, so hostile that it would make a grown man cry. With extreme heats and oxygen nowhere to be found, he lived his life day by day. There are about 100 species in the Archaebacteria kingdom. I will share 3 examples with you. Prepare yourselves. The methonogens. They produce methane from carbon dioxide and hydrogen. They die in the presence of oxygen and can be found in swamps and marshes. And cowiness. Thermoacidophiles. They usually grow in hot acidic environments like hot springs and use hydrogen sulfide as an energy source. The Austin. Oh, sorry. I don't know how that got mixed in. Halophiles. It requires high concentrations of salt to survive. It lives in the Dead Sea and the Great Salt Lake. Until the 1950s, biologists thought that there were only 2 kingdoms. One for animals and one for plants. Boy, were they wrong. They had 0 kingdoms to cover fungi, protists, and bacteria. Also known as ancient bacteria, this cell is very important, for it is everywhere in the universe. From the inside of cows, termites, and marine life, it is also found at the bottom of the ocean and Yellowstone Park. Don't dare confuse it with eubacteria, for it consists of different structures, metabolisms, and environments. Archaebacteria is thought to be the start of civilization, paving the way for protists to rule the day. So the next time you stare into the eyes of an Archaebacteria, remember to smile and give it a thank you, for without it, you might not be here today.
That's the kind of shit I would have pulled when I was in middle school. All right. So that's domain bacteria and domain archaea. Let's talk about domain eukarya. All the members are eukaryotic. Remember that eukaryotes have a nucleus and membrane-bound organelles, and there are 4 kingdoms that I need you to know about: Protista, Kingdom Fungi, Kingdom Plantae, and Kingdom Animalia. Kingdom Protista is very unique because it is the only kingdom that defines organisms by what they are not. If something is not a fungus, a plant, or an animal, it is a protist. They can, what the hell? Excuse me. Sorry, I got these crazy cats knocking stuff over and these insane neighbors that have this thing on their door that just clatters really loudly every time they open their door, and they always slam the door. And so every time it sounds like there's something terrible happening outside my door, and I'm still not used to it. Anyway, moving on. Kingdom Protista can be grouped based on whether they are plant-like, animal-like, or fungus-like. We are not going to watch this because it got me in trouble with copyright stuff last time, and I want to be able to post this lecture online. Slime molds are protists that are single-celled, and they display basic intelligence. This also got me in trouble for copywriting, but you should really watch it. It shows how slime molds solve a maze, and then they predict the routes of the Tokyo railway system by forming paths between oat flakes. It's really cool. So those are the domains and kingdoms. When we are placing something in a domain and a kingdom, you have to consider these things. First of all, is it eukaryotic or is it prokaryotic? Prokaryotes have a nucleoid area and no membrane-bound organelles. Eukaryotes have a nucleus and membrane-bound organelles. Remember endosymbiosis, our endosymbiotic theory we talked about when we were discussing mitochondria and chloroplasts. Endosymbiosis, within, together, living. So two things living together within each other. What that means is that we originally started with two independent prokaryotes. One prokaryote engulfed the other. The smaller prokaryote lived inside the larger prokaryote. And the smaller prokaryote provided energy for the larger one, and the larger one provided protection for the smaller one. And that's how eukaryotes evolved. The second thing we have to consider is whether the organism is unicellular or multicellular. All prokaryotic organisms are unicellular. Eukaryotic organisms can be either unicellular or multicellular. Next, we have to ask if it's autotrophic or heterotrophic. An organism that makes its own food is called an autotroph, or we say it is autotrophic. Organisms that do photosynthesis are autotrophs. And organisms that do not do photosynthesis, they have to consume autotrophs or consume something that has consumed an autotroph. These organisms are called heterotrophs. We say they are heterotrophic. Next, we have to ask whether it has a cell wall, and if so, what is that cell wall made of? Remember that a cell wall is a rigid structure surrounding the cell. And so far, we've only discussed plant cells having cell walls, but there are a lot of other kinds of cells that have cell walls. Keep in mind, animal cells do not have a cell wall. They only have a cell membrane. Other kinds of cells can have a membrane and a cell wall. They can be made of many materials. All of these are different types of carbohydrates, and we will talk about them right now, I guess. Peptidoglycan is this extensive structure of cross-linked carbohydrates that forms the cell wall of some bacteria, some archaea, and some protista. So this dark line here, this is a microscope picture of a cross-section of a bacterium. Here is the inside of the bacterium. We've got our cell membrane, which is this first layer outside the cytoplasm. There it is. Then we've got this thick layer of peptidoglycan, and then we have, of course, the cytoplasm, which is the interior of the cell. Chitin is another carbohydrate that forms the cell wall of fungi. We've got bread mold, which is a kind of fungus. We have mushrooms. We have unicellular fungi. This is penicillium, here it is again, which creates penicillin, the drug. Yeast is a form of fungus. This is a diagram of what chitin looks like. We've got inside the cell, we've got our cell membrane as usual, our membrane proteins, and then we have our cell wall of chitin. And then on top of the chitin are other structures depending on what kind of cell you're talking about. There might be other things outside the chitin. These are it's not exactly roots, but it's like a root network called mycelium for mushrooms, they network with one another through these root-like structures that you can see the cell walls are made of chitin right here. These are the cell walls. Cellulose forms the cell wall of plants. We have, of course, a plasma membrane, a cell membrane, and then we have these thick cross-linked structures of cellulose. And then that forms the cell wall. And on top, we have the cuticle, just like we discussed when we were talking about photosynthesis. Here is a synthesis question. It brings together a lot of information into one question. I'm waiting for 7 answers. All right. Huh. Oh, wait, there's one more person. Okay. 57% chose A. A is the correct answer. There, like, isn't even an explanation. A is just the correct answer. Let's talk about this. It has cell walls, it has membrane-bound organelles, which means it's eukaryotic, and it obtains its energy from decomposing bread. So if we go back up here, I was talking about how bread mold is a type of fungus. So the correct answer here is kingdom fungi. Let's go ahead and fill in this table together because I want you guys to have the right answers when you're studying. What is that noise? Okay. All right. First domain. No. Domain bacteria. Oh, shoot. I need to plug in my PC. Okay. There we go. Bacteria. No. The kingdom within the domain bacteria that I need you to know about is eubacteria. There are many kingdoms within bacteria. All bacteria are prokaryotic. Sometimes they have a cell wall. If they do, the composition can be many different things. So we'll just put varied composition there. Unicellular. All bacteria are unicellular, and they could be either autotrophic or heterotrophic. The next domain is domain archaea. I don't know why I keep trying to type eukarya. The kingdom that I want you to know about in there is archaebacteria. Archaebacteria are prokaryotic. They sometimes have a cell wall, can be made of various things. They are always unicellular, and they could be either autotrophic or heterotrophic. The last domain is eukarya. The kingdoms Protista, fungi, plantae, and animalia are part of eukarya. There are also other kingdoms, but these are the only ones that I need you to know about. They are all eukaryotic. So you can go ahead and write that. Cell wall. Protists may have a cell wall. If they do, it can be made of many different things, varied composition. They could be either unicellular or multicellular, and they could be either autotrophic or heterotrophic. What about fungi? Fungi are eukaryotic. They have a cell wall made of chitin. They could be either unicellular or multicellular, and they are always heterotrophic. Kingdom Plantae, these guys are eukaryotic. Yes, they have a cell wall. It's made of cellulose. And they are always multicellular. And they are always autotrophic. Finally, we come to animals. Animalia, eukaryotic, no cell wall, always multicellular, and always heterotrophic. So you can go ahead and take a picture of that or screenshot it and save it, and you can use that to study for the final. And now we're going to move on. Cladograms. A cladogram is a diagram that shows relationships among organisms. It's much like a family tree. And we've already gone over this a little bit. The branch lines end at groups of organisms with a common ancestor. The common ancestors are indicated by nodes. A node is just an intersection between two branches. So this is a node, this is a node, this is a node, and this is a node. Closely related organisms will have shared traits. Let's take a look at this simple one. Here is, all right, let me get my pen here. Here is the common ancestor right here. Some of the offspring of this common ancestor became what we now know as tortoises, and some of them gained hair. Some of the ones that gained hair have offspring that we now know as horses, and some of those hairy organisms became carnivores. Some of these carnivorous, hairy organisms have offspring that we now know as wolves, and some of those carnivorous, hairy organisms gained retractable claws. Some of those organisms with retractable claws that are carnivores and hairy became leopards, and others developed the ability to purr, and then we have the house cat, which is our final destination on this cladogram. This is a more complex cladogram. I just wanted you to see how complex it can be. We have this, I don't know how to undo that. Oh, well. The red italicized letters show you the different physical traits that were acquired at each point along this family tree. Now, I would have you do this activity, and if you are still listening, I want you to type your name in the chat and tell me you have a choice. You do not have to do both activities. You could do the viruses one or the cladograms one. Now, the viruses one is a lot longer, but all the answers are there. It's just combing through the data and finding the answers. Cladograms is much shorter, but it involves critical thinking, which means you're going to have to come up with the answers on your own. So type in the comments which one you are choosing to do, and then I will give you full credit for the other one, and you won't have to do it. And both of those are due tonight at 11:59. Are there any questions? Ooh, I see one thing in the chat. Okay. All right, cool. That's it. Thank you so much, everyone. I hope you have a lovely day.